shoulders. Among other things, Dr. Dutoy, together with Mr. Kennedy Kaposa, our Chief Financial Officer, must guide this institution to constantly enhance our own good governance and management so as to lead by example. As I was preparing for this session, I came across profound words uttered by our late former president, Nelson Mandela, at the International Ombudsman Institute gathering in 2000. He said, I quote, "In South Africa, like in many parts of the developing world, the substantive difference people seek to fill from the advent of democracy and political freedom is the alleviation of poverty and material deprivation. We do the long-term future of democracy a profound disfavor, and we are unfaithful to the dreams we pursued in our liberation and democratic struggles if we do not make the realization of a better life for all the central objective of our new democracies." These words bear resonance to the spirit of my findings and remedial action as articulated in some of the 3 investigative reports that I'm releasing this afternoon. The reports are A Fair Chance to Serve, Cost of Travel, and Ambulance Ethics. I have temporarily withheld the report to an alleged breach of the Executive Ethics Code by the Minister of Trade and Industry, Honorable Rob Davis, for later release. This report will form part of a batch of reports that will focus on the separation of party and state. I have also withheld the report titled Permitted Benefits with a view to releasing it on Wednesday this week, the 1st of April, at about 11 a.m. The 3 that we are releasing today bring to about 20 the number of investigation reports that we have issued this year. We have, however, issued a lot of informal reports that we have not published because we decide to only publish the ones that either cover complex issues or systemic deficiencies. You will note, though, from our annual report that the bulk of our cases are handled differently. They do not culminate in investigation reports. Most of our complaints are resolved through quick, appropriate dispute resolution methods such as negotiation, and conciliation. This sees parties that are involved in dispute brought together in a bid to make the matters resolved amicably. During such sessions, a settlement agreement is developed and the parties sign on the dotted line, paving the way for the implementation of the remedial action. I must indicate that when we have a settlement agreement, it makes it even easier to ensure the implementation of remedial action. It's only when ADR efforts fail that we proceed to investigate and report in matters of service failure. Of course, when it's an issue of conduct failure, which is corruption, unethical conduct, and abuse of public funds, we investigate and report regardless of the possibilities for ADR. And the difference is that many of those reports as well are issued as an informal reports, and only certain ones are issued as formal reports. Before I proceed to the reports being released today, I would like to cite a few of the ADR cases that have seen people's dignity being restored and lives affirmed. In one case, a Northwest pensioner was last month awarded 200,000 Rand compensation over life-threatening damages to his house, allegedly as a result of a government infrastructure development project. As we speak, the man's household is getting ready to move into a new home on an alternative site where they hope to live happily, hopefully ever after. He approached us complaining that a Northwest Provincial Government project to construct a road in his home village left him and his family fearing for their lives in a house that was teething on the brink of collapse. The road passes a few feet from his front door. The walls of his house began to crack badly, allegedly as a result of the use of heavy road construction machinery. He complained that the equipment was shaking the structure to its very foundations, placing the lives of his family in danger. He also complained that in addition to a disintegrating house, the road's stormwater drainage system was constructed in a way that is faced his yard, ensuring flooding of the enclosure each time it rained. This left him stranded in the house with no way of connecting with the outside world in person. The wet clay grounds in the surroundings also left his cattle trapped in the mud. When we last spoke him, about a week ago, the happy 61-year-old gentleman had just paid for building material to construct a new and safe house for his family. We also dealt with a case involving a Free State taxi owner, also 61 years of age, who was thrown in a gloomy 6-year period during which he even contemplated taking his own life. This happened after a road accident during which his taxi, an only source of income, was crashed onto by a vehicle belonging to Statistics South Africa. The taxi, which at the time gave this 61-year-old man a daily income of about 700 Rand, was damaged beyond economic repair, leaving him in untold financial difficulty. Not only was he no longer able to provide for his family, which is his wife and 3 school-going children, creditors, including the financiers of his vehicle loan, were breathing down his collar and unwilling to listen to his explanations. We were approached in this particular case by Statistics South Africa and requested to investigate whether there was any wrongdoing by Statistics South Africa. And the process involved some investigation and an ADR process. At the end of the day, an agreement was reached through our facilitation, and the outcome included the following. He received an amount of 246,000, which covers the market value of his taxi at the time of the accident at 169,557.15. He was also given an amount to settle the debt of the financiers of the taxi, which amounted to 56,884.68. He was also given what here we refer to as consolatory pay or sorry money for all of the pain and suffering, which amounted to 20,000. That, of course, is very little compared to what you would get in a delictual suit. However, we don't place the complainant exactly where they would have been but for the maladministration, but we place them as close as possible to where they would have been but for the maladministration. In respect of both cases, I would like to thank the statistician general, Mr. Paddy Lefotla, for requesting us to get involved. That's the spirit we expect from all of those who exercise public power. If they want an impartial decision, they may approach us and we may make that decision. I would like to thank the Deputy Pub Protector who eventually got involved when the officials that were handling these matters requested him to chair the ADR sessions. I now move to the investigation reports we are releasing today. The first report I will deal with is titled The Cost of Travel. It communicates my findings and appropriate action to remedy any wrong I may have found as envisaged in section 182(1)(c) of the Constitution, following an investigation into a complaint launched by Honorable Winston Rabutapi, MP of the Democratic Alliance, DA. The complaint involved an alleged violation of the Executive Ethics Code and Constitution through excessive use of ministerial travel privileges by the Minister and Deputy Minister responsible for the Department of Sport and Recreation, the Honorable Fikile April Mbalula, MP, and the Honorable Caldenes East Hazen. Honorable Rabutapi alleged that Minister Mbalula and Deputy Minister East Hazen improperly caused the Department of Sport and Recreation to incur expenditure in the sum of approximately 2.6 million in respect of 345 domestic and international flights between 2010 and 2012. Honorable Rabutapi further stated that in a parliamentary reply to a question that he asked, Minister Mbalula indicated that Deputy Minister Caldenes had spent an amount of approximately 1.1 million rand in respect of 105 flights effective from the 1st of April up to 2000, and these included 29 domestic flights at the cost to the department of about 806,293. The complainant further alleged that Minister Mbalula caused his department to incur an amount of 747,410 in respect of 16 international flights, and that the amount involved for these flights was excessive. President Zuma was informed of the delay in the finalization of the investigation, and I made an undertaking that I would issue the report as soon as it was finalized. I just want to indicate that these reports are supposed to be issued within 30 days. In both reports that I'm going to report on today, the respondents delayed in supplying the information, and by the time we got the information, which was months later, the investigator was no longer available, which then delayed because it had to then fall on the queue while the investigator was handling other cases. Having considered the evidence uncovered during the investigation against the regulatory framework, I make the following findings. Regarding whether Minister Mbalula and Deputy Minister Easthuizen improperly caused the Department of Sport and Recreation to incur an amount of about 2.6 million in respect of the 345 domestic and international flights, my finding is that while the Minister and Deputy Minister of Sport and Recreation, Minister Mbalula and Deputy Minister Easthuizen, spent an amount close to the alleged 2.6 million, I found no evidence indicating that any of the flights were undertaken improperly and outside the mandate of the Department of Sport and Recreation. On whether any of them incurred excessive transport costs for in the international and domestic flights, on whether Minister Mbalula and Deputy Minister Easthuizen improperly incurred excessive transport costs for international and domestic flights, I could not find any evidence showing that Minister Mbalula and Deputy Minister Easthuizen undertook flights not in line with the functions of their department or essential with regard to the 2012 Soccer World Cup, the International Cricket Council in India and Ireland, the International Rugby Board in New Zealand, and Netball Championships in Singapore and Gymnastrada in Australia. I have found that they did take about quite a number of flights. The minister took 12, the deputy minister took 16, and the amounts involved, as I've indicated, are pretty close to the amounts in question. I then had to make a finding whether their conduct constitutes a violation of the Executive Ethics Code or Section 96(2) of the Constitution. My finding is that that allegation could not be substantiated. In the absence of any finding that the flights were not necessary or the amounts involved were excessive, I couldn't then find a violation of the Executive Ethics Code. I must just indicate, though, that in making these findings, I looked at the regulatory framework that permits ministers to use their discretional powers to decide what trips to take and what trips not to take and how to have those trips funded. In the actual report, you will note that I also looked at the new austerity measures that have been put by the Minister of Finance and took into account that at the time these ministers, the minister and deputy minister, traveled, those austerity measures were not in place. So it was all up to their discretionary powers. I did, though, compare their conduct with the conduct of other ministers, as I have done in previous reports, such as in the extreme and the ethics of staying in comfort. And I did not find that they had done anything that was outside the principles I established in those cases. Due to the absence of any adverse findings against Minister Mbalula and Deputy Minister Easthuizen, and the fact that I did not find any other anomalies requiring correction, I have not taken any remedial action. Regarding the need to take austerity measures and ensure that limited public funds are primarily used for the benefit of the populace, I hope that Minister Mbalula and Deputy Minister Easthuizen, in exercising their discretionary powers to decide which trip to undertake and how much resources to invest in each trip, will and are taking into account the austerity measures by the Minister of Finance. Finally, on this matter, I'm pleased to record that none of the parties involved challenged my jurisdiction or powers, including the power to take appropriate remedial action. Furthermore, they have all accepted my findings without any reservations. That includes the complainant. I thank all parties involved for their cooperation, and I invite you to read the full executive summary in the report, because this is a short version that excludes some of the considerations I made in deciding as I have decided. The second report I'm releasing today is titled Ambulance Ethics. It communicates my findings and the appropriate remedial action to correct the situation as envisaged in Section 182(1)(c) of the Constitution, following an investigation into a complaint lodged by Mr. Sizwe Mchunu, a member of the KwaZulu-Natal Provincial Legislature representing the DA, lodged on 14 December 2012. The complaint alleged a breach of the Executive Ethics Code by Dr. Sibongiseni Dlomo, KZN member of the Executive Council for Health, involving improper use of an emergency medical helicopter to attend to a private political event that was not a medical emergency, thus extraneous to the purposes of the medical helicopter. The complaint included an allegation that the unavailability of the said medical helicopter for a child injured in an accident that occurred while it was flying MEC Dlomo may have caused the death of that child. In the main, the complaint was that MEC Dlomo utilized an emergency medical helicopter of the Department of Health to attend a funeral, and that MEC Dlomo's usage of the emergency medical helicopter on that day in question resulted in the department being unable to utilize it to attend to an accident, resulting in the death of a minor, or in the death of a child. The complainant alleged that on the 3rd of November 2012, MEC Dlomo used the South African Air Mercy Red Cross Trust, an only available emergency medical helicopter based in the eThekwini Metro, to fly to SABC community on 3 November 2012, which was a purpose not related to its intended use. Given that the purpose of the medical helicopter is to attend to medical emergencies in a responsive way, the 750 kilometers round trip to SABC was in conflict with the public health care services being responsive to the needs of the public, and thereby in conflict with good governance, and more specifically in violation of his duties under the Executive Ethics Code. The complainant further alleged that MEC Dlomo commandeered the medical helicopter for reasons that appear not to be justifiable. He alleged that the medical helicopter resulted in the failure by emergency medical services to save the life of a child who died in a car accident on the same day, and this happened during the same period that the helicopter was being used by the MEC. It was also alleged that the MEC failed to lodge a flight plan with relevant authorities, and that he used the emergency medical helicopter to attend to his private interests. We may have included campaigning for his political party ahead of SABC municipal by-elections, which were to be held on 5 December 2012, and or attending a funeral of SABC hospital head Don Zungu's relative. While MEC Dlomo did not dispute that he indeed used the emergency medical helicopter to attend a funeral, he submitted that he was not exclusively attending the funeral. He maintained that his main reason was to address the community of SABC on issues that had been raised by the community and which could potentially lead to conflict. In investigating the matter, I had to consider the probity of the usage of the emergency medical helicopter by the MEC. On analysis of the complaint, the information sourced, the following issues were identified and investigated. 1. Did MEC Dlomo improperly use an emergency medical helicopter of the Department of Health to attend a funeral in violation of the Executive Ethics Code? 2. If he did use such emergency medical helicopter, did that result in the failure of the emergency services to provide emergency medical care to a child, resulting in his death? I considered the evidence that was uncovered during the investigation against the relevant regulatory framework and came to the following findings. 1. Regarding whether MEC Dlomo improperly used an emergency medical helicopter of the Department of Health to attend a funeral in violation of the Executive Ethics Code, I find that A. MEC Dlomo did use the emergency medical helicopter to fly to SABC on 3 November 2012, but he was not exclusively attending a funeral. His main mission was to address the community of SABC at the funeral about an incident that took place in SABC Hospital, which due to the vastness of distance and that roads would have been impossible to achieve in one day. B. The use of the emergency medical helicopter for activities that do not constitute a medical emergency is improper for various reasons, including feeding perceptions of using public emergency services for personal comfort at the expense of the public. C. However, I've accepted that MEC Dlomo bona fide believed it was not wrong to use the emergency medical helicopter, as this was part of a long-standing agreement between the department and the Red Cross Trust. The contract was also captured in an internal standard operational procedure regarding circumstances under which the emergency medical helicopter could be used. D. Although making financial sense with regard to optimal use of available ambulance hours, the contract was ill-conceived because, among other things, while executing an administrative mission, the ambulance would not be readily available for medical emergencies. MEC Dlomo's conduct was not in violation of the Executive Ethics Code. Regarding whether the utilization of the emergency medical helicopter by MEC Dlomo resulted in the failure of the emergency services to provide emergency medical care to a child, resulting in his death, I find that the department did respond expeditiously to the accident using ground vehicles. There is no evidence that indicates that the emergency medical helicopter that was used by MEC Dlomo on that day in question was required for that emergency or any other. However, the policy is inappropriate as there is a real risk of a person dying because of the emergency medical ambulance being unavailable while being used for administrative purposes. As I've indicated, the arrangement also feeds to negative perceptions regarding competing needs of patients and departmental management. MEC Dlomo has accepted that the policy presents uncomfortable practical and ethical risks and has undertaken to have it reviewed as soon as possible. I have accepted, though, that given the distance between Durban and Hlabisa, had he travelled by road, he would not have been on time to reach Hlabisa in time to address the community. We looked at Google Maps search, which indicates the distance between Hlabisa and Durban to be 268 kilometers, which approximately takes three and a half hours by road. Though not investigated, it has been brought to my attention that other provinces have similar arrangements with their helicopter ambulances. Appropriate remedial action I take in terms of Section 182(1)(c) of the Constitution is to call on A, the head of department, Dr. Zungu, to take immediate action to review the contract between the department and the Red Cross Trust to make provision for a separate helicopter to cater for non-medical emergencies. B, to the Minister of Health and MECs acting under the auspices of MINMEC to consider review arrangements pertaining to helicopter ambulance services to establish if other provinces have similar arrangements and to correct the situation if that is the case. Just in summary, I have not found the MEC to have violated the Executive Ethics Code. I have found that they had a policy that had been there in the department for years and that they followed the policy to the letter. The policy to save money because the helicopter ambulance is given to them for a fixed amount of hours per month permits them then to use some of those hours for administrative emergencies. They acted in relation to that policy. What I find discomforting is the policy itself, and the MEC has agreed to have it reviewed. But we're now asking then the Minister of Health and the other MECs in the country to look at this arrangement, because I was in one province, which I will not mention because we did not speak to them. We found that they have exactly the same policy. The last report is titled A Fair Chance to Serve. It communicates my findings and the appropriate remedial action I'm taking in terms of Section 182(1)(c) of the Constitution, pursuant to an investigation into the alleged improper failure by the South African Police Service, SABC, to enlist its former member, Mr. MC Maloba, the complainant, to its service after it responded to an advertisement that sought to recruit former members of the SABC back into the service, and its failure to give him valid reasons in that regard. The quote that I gave you earlier is actually used in this particular case. The quote from former President Nelson Mandela, taken from his address in 2000 to the Ombudsman community at the International Ombudsman Institute conference. I will not repeat the quote, but it's really about the duty of those who exercise public power to bear in mind that they should do so in line with constitutional values and the vision of society that is captured in the Constitution. The complainant, a 47 years old unemployed married father with 3 dependents, a 23-year-old girl, a 19-year-old boy, and 16-year-old girl, who is a former member of SABC in Polokwane, allegedly responded to an advertisement that was issued by the SABC in January 2010, inviting former members to submit their applications if they were still interested in returning to its service. He allegedly went through an assessment process in February 2012, after which he was shortlisted and subsequently passed the assessment. However, the SABC failed to re-enlist him to its service. In the main, the complaint was that SABC unduly failed to give the complainant reasons regarding why he was not re-enlisted into its service after he made several attempts to solicit its reasons. In fact, it took 2 years for him to get reasons why he had not gotten the job. When the SABC finally gave him the reason, it was factually incorrect and therefore could not be used to justify his exclusion. The reason allegedly given to him was that he had a civil case pending against him, and that in terms of the SABC policy, if a former member had a pending civil case, he may not be re-enlisted. SABC did not dispute that the complainant applied for a permanent police officer position and was assessed as fit to serve. It further did not dispute that it delayed informing the complainant of the reasons, and when it did, it informed him that the reason it could not re-enlist him was because it had an outstanding civil case against him. 2 years and 6 months after he applied to be re-enlisted, he was then told that the reason he had not been re-enlisted was because there was a civil case against him. SABC alleged that the Minister of Safety and Security had a civil claim of an outstanding debt of 22,500 rand against the complainant. On analysis of the complaint, the following issues were identified and investigated. 1. Did SABC unduly fail to inform the complainant about the outcome of his application and assessment? If so, did such failure constitute improper conduct as enlisted in Section 182(1) of the Constitution and maladministration as enlisted in Section 641 of the Child Protector Act? B. Were the reasons that were subsequently provided by the SABC in not enlisting the complainant fair, just, and reasonable in the circumstances of this case? And lastly, was the complainant prejudiced by the conduct of SABC? The investigation process commenced with an attempt to mediate between the parties, hoping they would reach a mutual agreement, as we have done in the cases I have reported on earlier. After the parties could not agree, a formal investigation was conducted, and it involved meetings and interviews with the complainant and SABC officials. It also involved a thorough inspection of all relevant documents and correspondence received from SABC. The standard used to assess the propriety of the conduct of the SABC involved laws regulating administrative action, policies and prescripts regulating recruitment at the SABC, and principles of natural justice developed over time. Section 33 of the Constitution and Section 3 of the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act, number 3 of 2000, were relied on to assess whether the conduct of SABC was in compliance with the complainant's right to just administrative action. The SABC regulations for appointment were applied to establish whether the reasons provided by SABC for not enlisting the complainant to its service were justifiable. Having considered the evidence uncovered during the investigation against the relevant regulatory framework, I make the following findings. Whether SABC unduly failed to inform the complainant about the outcome of his application and assessment, and if so, was such failure a form of improper conduct as envisaged in Section 182(1) of the Constitution and maladministration as envisaged under Section 6, subsection 4(1) of the Public Protector Act. My findings are as follows. 1. SABC unduly failed to inform the complainant about its decision on the outcome of his application to be re-enlisted, and also failed to give him a reasonable opportunity to make a representation regarding its decision not to re-enlist him. 2. Such failure violated Section 3(2)(b), subsection 2, and subsection 3, 4, and 5 of the Promotion of Administrative Justice Act, and Section 33(1) and subsection 2 of the Constitution. 3. The conduct of SABC constitutes improper conduct as envisaged in Section 182(1) of the Constitution and maladministration as envisaged in Section 6, subsection 4(a)(1) of the Public Protector Act. The second issue I had to consider was whether the reasons subsequently provided by SABC in not enlisting the complainant were fair, just, and reasonable in the circumstances. I have found the following. 1. The complainant was advised that the reason he could not be re-enlisted was that the Minister of State and Security, now Minister of Police, had a pending civil case against him relating to a departmental debt of 22,500 rand. He was later required to undergo a new assessment. 2. After perusing Regulation 11 of the SABC relating to application for appointment and the SABC circular dated 7 January 2010 relating to re-enlistment in the SABC, I could not find any provision that excludes a person with a civil case pending against him or her from being appointed. 3. In the circumstances, the reason given to the complainant by the SABC for its failure to re-enlist him to its service is found to be unfair, unjust, and unreasonable. 4. It is disconcerting that the complainant and my office were provided with contradictory reasons by SABC as to why he could not be re-enlisted to its service, despite being informed that the reason he could not be re-enlisted was that the Minister of State and Security, or now Minister of Police, had a pending civil case against him relating to a departmental debt of 22,500. In another instance, he was informed that there was a moratorium on the placements or re-enlistments of former members. 5. My office, on the other hand, was informed by a letter dated 12 September 2012 from the Provincial Commissioner of SABC in Limpopo that his office had confirmed with the National Head Office that the complainant could be accommodated, but still had to comply with all previous requirements for re-enlistment as indicated in the advertisement of 17 January 2012. This requirement, he said, required the complainant to redo the assessments he had previously done and passed. which happened more than 2 years ago. My finding is that requiring the complainant to redo the assessments for the second time after more than 2 years was both unfair and unreasonable in the circumstances. I find that the complainant's right to just administrative action enshrined in Section 33 of the Constitution was violated. I then had to make a finding whether the complainant was prejudiced as envisaged in the Public Protector Act, specifically Section 6. My finding is that the complainant was prejudiced by the conduct of SABC because a timely response by the SABC would have afforded him an opportunity to take action to clear his name against the allegations of having a civil case, which would have resulted in SABC re-enlisting him into its service. B, had he been re-enlisted in 2012, this would have placed him in a better financial position, but failure to re-enlist him has meant that he lost on potential income, which would have come in handy, since to date he is not employed and is married with 3 dependent children. In my view, had the complainant been enlisted as a police officer when he was assessed as fit to serve, he would have been placed optimally in a position to pay the Minister of Police the alleged accumulated debt of 22,500. What I'm saying is, even if he had owed SABC the money, re-enlisting him would have placed him in a better position to pay the money. However, I just want to reiterate, though, that I have made no finding that he owed the money. In this regard, I find the exclusion of the complainant from the re-enlistment process irrational and unfair, because the complainant was not only placed in a position of being unable to pay the alleged debt, he has unduly been plunged into poverty. I also find it disconcerting that the alleged debt was never substantiated by any legal process of recovery against the complainant. Instead, the complainant was required to undergo a new assessment before being re-enlisted. In my view, the complainant had a legitimate expectation that once he had passed the interview and all the assessments, he would be re-enlisted into the South African Police Service. The appropriate remedial action I am taking in pursuit of Section 182(1)(c), with a view to placing the complainant as close as possible to where he would have been had the maladministration not occurred, is the following. 1. The National Commissioner of the SABC should immediately re-enlist the complainant into the SABC and provide him with a training program to assist him to achieve the required physical fitness levels. 2. The Provincial Commissioner of SABC should write a letter of apology to the complainant for the prejudice caused to him and his family within 30 days from date of issuing of this report. And 3. The National Commissioner should compensate the complainant within 60 days from date of issuing of this report, and a reasonable portion of what he would have earned to be determined by an independent assessor. As I have said on previous reports, I have played my part. It is now up to the competent authorities mentioned in these reports to play their part. Thank you.
Thank you, Public Protector. We will now open the floor for questions, and we will take them in batches of 4 at a time. Just to remind colleagues to first introduce themselves and the media houses they represent before they pose their questions. The floor is now open for questions. I don't see any hands. Could that be an indication that the public protector was disturbed? Okay. Mr. Bateman from Eyewitness News. Anybody else? In the absence of any other questions, oh, Daily Times as well.
Is this mic all right?
Okay, someone is fixing it.
Is that all right?
Yes, yes.
Good afternoon, panel. It's Barry Bateman, Eyewitness News. Ma'am, you know how it goes. I'm not going to ask you on items you've just spoken about, so it's fine to speak on other matters that I'd like to quiz you on, please. The matter related to the allegations that you're a spy. Have you sent your letter to the State Security Agency, as I think you told my colleague Stephen Curtis about a week and a half ago? Have they replied? What was their response to that, if indeed you've sent their letter? When will you be taking any action against the State Security Agency, if at all? And then on another matter, the ongoing Nkandla report progress that's happening in Parliament. Are you satisfied with what's happening in Parliament? Do you not believe that that is perhaps undermining the role that you have played in this investigation? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bateman. Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon, Deputy Mayor from Daily Sun. Just to follow on to outstanding reports, my 10th question, the Swani report on the mayor's alleged allegations of using funds for his campaign some time ago. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Are there any more questions from the floor? Okay, SABC.
Has there been any form of communication between your office and Minister of Police?
Okay, thank you. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you. Let me start with Mr. Barry Bateman. What has your question got to do with the release of reports?
Absolutely nothing. But I know you're always open to assisting the media with any question we have.
What a clever answer. Right, you make it difficult for me then to run away from that one. I did not write to the South African State Security Agency. The letters were written to... Right. The letters were written to the Minister of Defense as the head of the security cluster and to the Speaker of Parliament. I have not received any responses yet. But basically, they were challenging two things. The basis for the announcement that I was being investigated on allegations sourced from Twitter. On allegations sourced from Twitter. And secondly, the State Security Agency's announcement to the public that I had requested an investigation, because in the letters I indicate that I never requested such. Regarding the progress that is being made on Nkandla, perhaps I'll take that together with, have I been contacted by the Minister of Police? There hasn't been any interaction between my office and the Minister of Police other than our compliance officer following up on remedial action on all of the reports. That would be checking with the South African Police on the remedial action that should have been implemented by themselves in line with the remedial action in the report. There's been no other interaction that I know of. The progress in Parliament, I'm not aware what's happening in Parliament. The information I have is the information that the media has circulated, that the Minister of Police's report is being awaited. From my side, I've indicated that I write these reports, I finish them and submit them to appropriate authorities. I then have my compliance officer or our compliance officer here, the Pub Protector South Africa, following up on remedial action with all of the institutions concerned. And if there are any problems, I'm then made aware, and then I deal with the institutions concerned. In the actual report, you will note that, okay, no, it's not any of this report, but in the report that will be released on Wednesday, because we've completed it but just held it back because it's too important to be, well, not too important, but it deals with complex issues around ethics versus all of these other things. I speak about the fact that the principles I'm using in that report have previously not been contested, and they were implemented. All of the principles that arise around what you owe and should you pay or should you not pay, if it was given to you unlawfully or if it was misappropriated for your benefit. That means I've answered the question to the colleague from the SABC. I hope that answers your question, Lulu. And then, Sam? Yes, that's the question from the Daily Sun, Ms. Simon. It's one of the reports that we are finalizing at this stage. We are busy, as it is the end of the financial year, trying to put all hands on deck to finalize all of the reports. You will note, in respect of the reports that we're releasing today, that the investigations were completed 2 years ago. Well, it becomes a problem then to put together the information because of the under-resourcing of the investigation teams.
Thank you, Public Protector. Are there any more questions from the floor? Any takers? There doesn't seem to be any more questions speaking. I don't know if you have any closing statements to say before we adjourn.
Just to say, on behalf of the Pub Protector South Africa team, we thank you for your interest in the work we do, for the role you play in mobilizing the people of South Africa to use the pillars of democracy to continuously engage with those they have entrusted with public power. We sincerely appreciate that. I'm particularly grateful in advance that in your reporting you will not just report on the ethical issues, but you will report on some of the early resolution matters that we lifted and included in our report today, and that you will also report on a fair chance to serve, because it is an important report to us. It is a Gokudlamini kind of report, but it establishes key principles around the right to be treated fairly when you seek employment, and the duty of the state not to be part of the problem when it comes to causing poverty. Thank you. Happy Easter holidays.
What we see on Wednesday?
It was an April
Oh,
Fool's joke.
yes. No, seriously, it's not an April Fool's joke. We do have that report, unsettled, I'm sorry, unpermitted benefits. That's still going to go out on Wednesday, and we hope it will be a 1-hour job.
Back here.
Yes. Unless the press club wants to host us.
Okay, keep telling, start telling people to tell us the question. That went well. Extremely well. Yes, can you imagine? Can you imagine?
No, I didn't see that.